Right, well, it's been a while since I've talked about my cars, and I think I'll just start with the Dodge. So, this is my 1947 Dodge, and it's busy sitting here in the yet unfinished driveway that we've created since we've built that development that's behind. And it's sitting here because I've actually been getting some work done on it in the last few days. So it's been sitting without any shelter for the last year now, since I had to dismantle the garage that I had it in for the development. But it looks pretty good. I've cleaned it a little bit, but there's a lot of dust around here at the moment because the fields are being harvested, and you can see the roof. I cleaned it, but the roof's covered in some sort of dust. Well, the problems I had were I had it serviced, and then I discovered one issue that was new and one that was old. This rear amber light is actually the indicators. They weren't there originally in the car. They were added. Obviously, originally the car had indicators red. They were in with the stoplights. But I didn't think that was very safe in the UK, especially if you're now driving on modern roads. So when we had it restored, or the bodywork painted, which was back in about 2005. So that was when this car was last, was painted. Painted blue anyway. I had those lights fitted. Now, the lights on this side suddenly stopped working. Anyway, after a little bit of messing around, we discovered it was an earth had come loose. No, actually, sorry, not on that one. What it was there were some wires. I don't understand who did it, but they were wired. It was wired the wrong way round. Anyway, when we switched these wires around, we got everything working again. So there we are with that. Anyway, it seemed a bit of a problem at the time, and now it seems easy. But the other problem that I had with this car, and it's been an ongoing problem really ever since I had it. Now, there's a lot of interesting facts about this car, because I'll just talk about it for a minute. This is a 1947 Dodge. I'm sorry, I'm just going to open the other window here. Right, this is a 1947 Dodge. And basically, that's it was designed in the 1930s, and the car was really launched in 1941. And shortly after it was launched, this body shell, this body style, and the mechanicals. Well, the mechanicals were a bit older than that. I think the engine was. I don't think the engine was specifically designed for this car. I think it had been used before that. But anyway, when this car was basically launched in 1941, not shortly afterward, Pearl Harbor happened, and shortly after that, the production of these cars, all the cars ceased and went over to military vehicles, tanks, and God knows, and trucks and everything. But then after the war, they modified slightly the design of the exterior of this car and launched it in '46. Together with a DeSoto and a Chrysler and so on, and the Plymouth, and they launched it as the first models after the Second World War. So there weren't any variations. I mean, basically there was a Dodge. This was a Dodge. It was called a Dodge Custom, and it was basically just a Dodge. Then they had a Chrysler version. The Chryslers had bigger engines. They had the straight 8, this is a straight 6, and the straight 8, with the straight 8 engine, the front part from the A-pillars here, front was slightly longer. If you look at a Chrysler, the back part is well, same as this car, but the front part is slightly longer. You know, I had those cars as well, you know, a few years ago. But that was because it had a bigger engine. Though I don't understand why, because of course there's so much room in this engine bay, but still. Anyway, then they had the DeSoto and I had a Plymouth. And then they ran this for 3 years, 46, 47, and 48. And then they produced a new body style. It was the 49. The 49s came out. And I had a 49 Dodge as well. So the 49 Dodge was the same engine, same drivetrain, basically the same car, except it had a more modern body. It did away with some of the sort of clumpier looking old pre-war styling, and was slightly more modern. But I mean, that didn't stay for long, only a couple of years, and then they started to go into the 50s and improve the design. Well, both the engines and the cars, but bodies. Anyway, so this car, when I had it, I bought it. It came direct from California in 2004, and it had belonged to the president of the Dodge Club in California, and I've got a lot of paperwork that came with it, which detailed a lot of the work. That was extensive work that was done on this car. So the car was in very good condition, and the interior had been reupholstered in the original materials, and it looks exactly as it was when it was made. And since then, and that was getting on to 20 years ago now, I've kept it in quite good condition. It hasn't been worn or anything since then. But we did have a problem with the engine, which had been reconditioned in the States, and we had to basically strip the engine down and redo it. And then I discovered that the damper little gizmo at the front, vibrating thing, the damper at the front, at the front of the engine, was coming apart, and that was causing a noise, and I managed to get a new one. So finally we got the engine running smoothly, and we stripped the body because it was in the original brown and it looked awful, and perhaps I should have kept it because it was the original color, but I decided to paint it this electric blue, which is a mini color, BMW mini color. And when we stripped all the paint, we stripped it down to bare metal. There was virtually no rust. I mean, the car was in excellent condition. It really was nothing to do to the bodywork, and the car was stripped completely. The doors were off and everything was taken off, and it was repainted completely. It took probably 18 months to 2 years, I think, which is why, or 18 months probably, that's why it was about 2005, I think, maybe getting on to 2006 when I finally got it on the road. And it's been like this ever since. I've done no work to the bodywork since then, and very little has gone wrong with it, apart from a few small, niggly electrical things, as I've just been mentioning. But anyway, the one problem that I never had right was the wipers. Now, when these cars were new, they had a few options that you could do. One was you could have the vacuum wiper system, or you could have an electric motor. And this car was fitted originally with an electric motor, and as far as I understand it, this is the same motor in it that was original, but it never worked properly. When I had it, it was so slow and very difficult to drive if it was raining, because they were just slow, and sometimes they almost stop. So about a week ago, I got the car electrician friend of mine up to see if he could maybe, well, it was worth looking at the motor and see if we could take the motor out, and because I reckon, well, the motor's old, and obviously, and could it be restored, or should I get a new motor? Well, he felt that it was possibly the mechanism, the control, the actual mechanism that was working the arms underneath. So we took everything out from underneath the dash under here. See if I can get a picture of it. I don't know whether the camera can pick that up, but up under there, there's the motor in the middle and the arms that work from the motor. So we disconnected all of that, took it out, and we discovered that there was one side that was slightly loose. There was one fixing that was a bit loose. We repaired that, but basically it worked really well. Let's have a look inside. Anyway, the engine, but it worked well. And when we had it out, we took a lead from the battery, 6-volt battery, because it's obviously 6-volt system, this car still, and we fired up the mechanism outside the car, and it worked fine, absolutely fine, quite fast actually. But when we finally refitted it, it didn't. And the funny thing is that when we put the first wiper on, the wiper arm, it worked okay. But when we put the second on, it stopped. It was going slow again. So we decided in the end that it was basically, it had enough power to run one wiper, but not two. Anyway, the result was we then finally, after all these years, discovered what was wrong with it. When you try to get too much draw on the feed that feeds the motor, the power drops. But if we took a direct lead to the wipers, the wiper motor, it worked fine. So there was something in that power line, that lead, that was affecting it. So I said to the electrician, well, can't we just wire that motor direct, which is what we've done. Because underneath we picked up a live lead, and we wired the motor direct to that. So what we've got now is, we've got the motor wired in two different ways. It's got two positions actually, it had two speeds, which was amazing. So when I'll do it in a minute, but when I turn it on the first speed, it works off the feed that is the live, and it'll work without the key on it here now. And it works all right. The only thing is, of course, it's permanently live, but you would turn the wipers off anyway. Anyway, let's turn it on. And there we go. Now that's just I've never had wipers like that. I think if I put it in the other position, for some reason it slows down. No, it's working. No, it's slowing a bit there. But that's quite amazing. I have never had wipers on this car before. I did fit washers to it, which are down here. I'll turn the ignition on. I got a switch down here, and I fitted washers. And what I did was I found somebody had a collection of new old stock of Volkswagen Transporter 6-volt washers, window washers, with motors built into them in the reservoir. So as I had a number of cars with 6 volts at the time, I bought about 4 of these units. I've still got one unused, but I fitted it to this car, which we'll have a look at. So we've got washers. That needs adjusting, that right side. So that works. At least never had washers when it was new. And there we go. I think I'm so amazed with that, because I never had wipers really working on this car before. And there's the old Volkswagen unit, and in good condition, of course. So you got the reservoir with the motor built into it, 6-volt. It's in good condition, obviously, because it was new. And there's the engine. It's stained on the top because when we took the engine apart to rebuild it, one thing we had a problem at the time, painted the engine and everything at the time, but when we put it back, it was we couldn't get the seal right at the water, when the water was coming in there at the top. So that was a bit of an issue. It stained the engine, and you know, it needs cleaning really, but it's not in bad condition. Yeah, but it runs lovely, so I'm going to start it up and we'll have a listen to it. I'm going to put this down. Hang on. Right, let's have a look at this starting up. Now, we did have starting problems with this car as well, and a lot of people on my channel from the States mainly were telling me that we had the wrong cables for 6-volt. They should be much thicker. So I did actually change some of the cables, and it did improve it. I haven't got the thick leads for the spark plugs, because you really need to buy those with all the clips on the end and everything. But I changed the leads for the battery and going to the starter motor, and it did improve things. Anyway, so we'll just see if we can start it up. Right, well, that was without a choke. Now, what I also have done in the last few months, when I had it serviced anyway, was to finally have, which it should have been fitted with all along by me, was a non-return valve for the fuel. Because what was happening was that if you left it for a while, obviously the fuel drained out of the carburetor, and of course the mechanical pump you had to churn it over on the battery for ages to start drawing petrol back up from the back. And now that's why it started a lot easier now, and it hasn't been run for a couple of days, but because the non-return valve seems to be working. So let's have a listen to this engine. Right, well, obviously it's not warmed up yet, but when it is, it becomes very quiet. In fact, all the noise really, obviously from the fan belt, something's knocking away. That's not the engine. The engine actually is very quiet and very steady. There's hardly any vibration in it at all. The damper, which is down in the front, is a new one which I got from California, from a company called Damper Doctor. And I think it was the right one for this car, and we had it in stock. I think I paid about $30 for it at the time, which was 10, 12 years ago now. But, I paid $30, I think, at the time, plus the shipping from California to England. The car drives really good. Anyway, the only other thing about this car that's worth mentioning is that they had another option, and that was, as far as I understand it, was the choice you could have in the rear differential with the ratios. And I think they had you know, a lower ratio, which is what this car's got, for mountainous regions. So you know, you had more power going up and down hills and mountainsides and so on. And though this car is exactly the same as my 49, the 49 would cruise absolutely lovely at around 60, 65 on a motorway. You know, it would go even a bit faster, but it would cruise happily at 60, 65. Whereas this car, once you get above 55, heading towards 60, it sounds like it's really, really, you know, over revving. It's, but it does do well in low speeds, and you can drive it because you've got the fluid drive. You can leave it in top gear, and if you're not in a hurry, you can just leave it in top gear. You don't have to touch the gears at all. When you stop, you don't put the clutch in, obviously, with the fluid drive. so you can drive it in top gear and it'll pull away in top quite happily, not quickly, but it will pull away. And so I just tend to sometimes drive it leisurely as an automatic, almost in top gear. And I'm sure that I know the engine's very torquey, but I think it's helped with the fact that this has got this very low gearing, well, relatively low gearing. And I sometimes thought I would have liked to have had it more like my other Dodge, the 49, which had the higher gearing. It was much better on the motorway, but I wouldn't want to really drive these cars that fast for long periods. Right, I think we'll leave that now, turn it off, and we'll have a look at some of the other cars. Okay, here we are in the part of our woods, and it's a significant part of the woods, which I'll come on to the reason why it's significant to this video towards the end. So these are the cars that I have, and let's start up here. So I've got my Dodge, obviously, still, and I've got my Citroën Ami, or Ami, as people tell me I should be pronouncing. This is a 1974 car, and I've had it for, well, around 12 years, maybe 10 years. I'll be honest with you, I've had very little problems with it that I can recall. I've had it serviced recently. It hasn't, none of my cars have been driven a lot in the last few years because of COVID, but not really because of COVID actually, but it's during that period. But I've been so involved in working on this project, which we've now finally finished, so the cars didn't get much use, and hardly used at all. I would start them up, drive them up and down this road here that we've got that runs through the woods. It's our wood, and it's a road that we made ourselves, and to give the cars a little bit of a run over, and to maybe take them down and put some fresh petrol in them or something. But this little car is wonderful. It's had a service. See if it'll start. Oh, it's very hot today here in England. It's getting on to 30, which is very hot, and these cars are hot inside. Let's have a look. So I've just opened the doors to just get a bit of fresh air in here. Now, see if this will start. Hopefully it will. That's good. So this car is hopefully it's in as good condition as when I bought it, which was a pretty good condition in my view. It's dusty and dirty, and the dust and everything we get is at the moment from the fields where they've been harvesting. It's dreadful. Everything looks very dour, but this car is lovely. I've done some fairly long journeys in it, 200 or 300 mile round trips, which quite a lot. And as I say, it's lovely, and I have no intention of getting rid of it, and I hope to during the next maybe 6 months have some small little imperfections on the paintwork, little bubbles in places coming up, put right, so that I can keep the paintwork as perfect as I can on an ongoing basis. Let's have a look. When I back in the 1980s, I had a red one of these, not an estate like this. It was a saloon, and it had a lot of rust on the wings. So in those days, you could buy fiberglass wings. They came white in fiberglass, and I bought 2 wings and bolted them onto this red Ami, and hand painted them, sprayed them the same red with spray cans that I bought, because obviously the car wasn't that old in those days, even though it had gone rusty. This car gets stuff, birds, a lot of birds around here in the woods, and it just gets dirty sitting up here. There are a number of places in this, now that we've finished the project, which we're going to build some garages, so hopefully we'll reach the point where I have my cars garaged again. But in the meantime, it needs extra care to keep them in good condition. I do tend to keep the polish on them quite well, so they're at least covered with some sort of water repellency. But lovely car. You know, I enjoy this car a lot. I've driven it a lot, and I think it's a lovely little car. It's not liked by everyone. I don't think my wife is too fond of it. I think she thinks it's a bit frumpy, maybe. The roof rack was it's an old period 1960s roof rack, I think. I put it on the car because I thought it looked, well, it made the car look frumpy, I guess, but rather than just have it sitting around doing nothing, the roof rack that is, I thought, well, period piece, I'll put it on the car. It makes the car look period, I think. Okay, so I've still got this car, and very pleased with it, and I do look after it, though it looks dirty at the moment. Let's have a look at the others. Right, well, this is the Chrysler Crossfire. I bought this car. The only reason I bought it is because I just absolutely love the design. I think it's a tremendous design, underrated, very underrated. Doesn't get the credit generally that it deserves. I think it gets a lot of credit from people that actually like it and understand it. It is basically a Mercedes, an older Mercedes, a Mercedes SLK, isn't it, from the late 90s. So that's what it is underneath. It was built by Mercedes. It was built in Stuttgart, even though it's a Chrysler. It's an American body design. Mechanically it's a Mercedes, and as I say, built by Mercedes. I think it's a nicer design. At least the rear part is a nicer design than the Mercedes version, though I think the design of the front is a little lacking. I don't think it is up to the same standard, and I don't quite like the front too much, but I do like the like indentations on the bonnet. I think they're pretty inspirational. Can't recall another car with that. It's generally speaking, I think it's a lovely design. It drives lovely, I think. It's not a well, I would say it's quite fast. It's not really a too sporty of a car, I don't think, but I'm not really into sports cars myself. I like large cruisers, really. The quality of the materials are not that great. The car is in excellent condition. It just needs cleaning. It's basically untouched, and it is, you know, without any marks really or anything. It just looks terrible at the moment with the dust. But the only place that it goes, of course, which is the seat here, because when you get in, and this leather is not that good. I got some silver leather, and it's actually silver. It matches the same as the trim, and I was going to get this section here cut out, and obviously on the other one, the bolsters, and have them changed to silver. But unfortunately, the guy who did the upholstery for me, he retired, and I never really got round to doing it. But I still got the material, and it's something that I, could do. But I've got the car on SORN at the moment, because over COVID we weren't driving the car, so this is a very expensive car to tax in the UK. A SORN means that you don't pay tax on it. You can't drive it on the road. It's got to be off-road, and it's got to be parked off-road, which it is. But then you don't have to pay any tax, so it doesn't really cost me. It just sits here now. What I'm going to do with it is probably keep it. They don't collect much money from sales. They're very low in price, these cars. which is sad really, because I think they're lovely. They're very comfortable. I think for a little sports coupe they're quite practical. This one's got a sports exhaust. Let's start it up. I don't know whether to pick the sound up, but it's got a oops, I turned this off. Everything works on it. Yeah, it was the aircon just come on. It's a lovely car, and you know, I'm going to keep it, but it's basically, to sell it you wouldn't get much for it. A car like this probably only fetch a couple of £1,000. Hardly worth selling unless you need the money, obviously. But as it's not costing me anything to sit here, it's just a toy, and this wood then is a toy cupboard, I guess. So I haven't got the heart to sell it, to be honest. It's a car that I like the design of. I'd hate to just give it away for a few £1,000s. Yeah, look at that. It's a really, I think, inspirational design. I think when they designed that car, which would have been at around the turn of the century, I suppose, around 2000. Well, it came out in 2002, I think, or 2003, something like that. This is a 2007, because they didn't run them for more than 3 or 4 years, if that. It was the first car that Chrysler and Mercedes created when they merged, or when, not merged, but when Mercedes took Chrysler over. So this was the first car they came out with. Anyway, speaking of Mercedes, this is my Mercedes W124 or 300E Estate 4MATIC. I've done a lot of videos on this car, but just to recap, this particular model is a very unique car because it's one of the few remaining, in the UK that is, on the road, the original 4MATIC system, which means that it's got a transfer box and it drives in two-wheel drive. But while it's on the move, if one of the back wheels slips, it automatically engages four-wheel drive by engaging the prop shaft that obviously drives the front wheels. And within a split second, it'll go from, I think it's something like maybe 60% at the back or a bit more, maybe 70 or 80% at the back and a small amount at the front. If that doesn't work, then it goes a bit more at the front, and if that doesn't work, then it locks the differential at the back. It's got a diff lock, and all that happens within the first 1.5 seconds or something. And it happens with technology that was created in the 80s. So this is a 1993. Now, what happened was that this process of a car being rear-wheel drive and engaging the prop shaft to drive the front wheels while it was driving, while it was moving, impacted on the clutch plates on the transfer box, and they were all failing. It was a major fault, and after about, I think, 2 years, something like that, Mercedes scrapped the system and went the same way as Audi with a permanent four-wheel drive system that just varied the difference between the torque being in the front and the back, whatever. And as the transfer boxes packed up on these cars, people either scrapped the car, got a reconditioned one, or took the other option that Mercedes came up with, and that was the newly designed transfer box they did to try and solve the problem. And that was a box which had, as I understand it, ceramic clutch plates. But at the time, and I'm going back, let's go back about 10 or 12 years, in England, that box cost about 6,000 quid, £6,000. So not many people were prepared to do that on a car that was probably already then over 10 years old. So when my transfer box went, which it did, I got a reconditioned one for, I think it was something under £1,000. But it didn't last long. The reconditioned box packed up after 6 months. So I love the car so much that I went and bought the Mercedes transfer box, which was the new box they designed, and I paid a lot of that money for it. So it was £6,000 plus the fitting. And touch wood, as they say, it's been all right since then. It works fine, works perfectly. But of course, obviously, that system includes the ABS as well, because you couldn't drive the car when the box failed because the whole system failed. But this car has this car is immaculate. It's immaculate, except that I've got a little carpet in the back at the moment, and it's completely covered in dust. But don't let that fool you. It's a absolutely unmarked, perfectly wonderful car underneath this. So let's have a look, because it has another factor as to why I keep the car. When this car was bought new, it was bought in England new by an English man who owned a company, and he had a house in France, south of France, and he wanted the car really to keep in his house in the south of France. So we ordered it with a British spec. It was first registered in England. It was an English car, but he ordered it for left-hand drive, and he drove it to the south of France. And for the first 4 or 5 years of its life, it spent most of it, well, it spent all that time really in the south of France. From what I was told when I had the car, because basically I'm the second owner, when it started to become necessary for the car to have the British test, MOT test, which is a government test. After 3 years of age, a car has to be tested. So it was in France still when it was 3 years old. He had it trailered back to the UK, had it tested, and taken back to France, because he never had it registered in France. It was always registered in the UK. And then finally he sold it when it was about 5 years old. And I bought it. It had done about 28,000 miles, I think, when he sold it, or when I bought it. And it's done over 100,000 now, about 110. And when he ordered it in the UK, he ordered it with every extra that Mercedes did at the time, because in those days, even the radio was an extra for Mercedes. And he wanted every extra. So it's got a lot of extras, actually. We've got, for example, we've got memory. Everything's electric, obviously. You've got electric seats, obviously, both front. Even the headrest goes up and down electrically. It's got memory seats, so it's got 2 positions for memory. And don't forget, this is a 1993 car. You've got lumbar control, which are these 2 things here. So both seats have got, using vacuum, I suppose, the lumbar, these things come up and down, pressure up and down. You feel them on your body when you work the controls, so that adjusts the lumbar supports in the seats. That's both seats. So both seats have got that. They're heated seats as well, and everything you could want there. It's got even got a fire extinguisher down here, down in front of the seat. Do you know what? I've never, in all the years I've had this car, I've had it over 20 years, I've never taken that fire extinguisher out of where it's sitting there. You see the red end of it there. It's got sunroof, obviously, and air conditioning. It's got a radio where the radio cover is the same wood as the trim. It's got, even when you bought them, this little gizmo here with the sliding cover, which is like got imitation wood looking on it, that was extra. You had to buy that. Otherwise you didn't have that section in the console. It's got an armrest, of course, that comes down. So I don't think there's much. I mean, you've got dipping mirrors with different intensities. You've got all the mirrors here on both sides. You've got heated door mirrors. I mean, you know, this is a car that's is now 30 years old, nearly. It'll be 30 years old next year. So the mirrors are heated, and obviously they're electrically operated both sides. You've got audio system which you can adjust between the front of the car and the back of the car. You can have it all at the front, all at the back, or halfway between the two. Obviously it's got self-closing rear tailgate. It's got 7 seats. And of course it's 4MATIC. Now, the only thing that this car's ever had, apart from anything else, it is always a little bit reluctant. Well, not reluctant, but it doesn't start that second. It takes a few churns to get it going. It's always been like that ever since I've had it. So we'll start it up. There we are. Immediately turn this off, because immediately you've got the air conditioning coming on. Right away it's cold. The air conditioning, I have actually bought a new compressor for that, and I also had a leak in the system at one point, and the aircon wasn't working for a few years till I discovered, or somebody discovered, where the leak was. So, but it's working fine. So I've got aircon working now, and all the lights have gone out, obviously, because if there's a problem with the four-wheel drive system, this orange light up here will come on to tell you there's a fault, and of course it won't pass MOT then, because it's linked to the ABS system. So I don't know what else to say. Oh yeah, I mean the steering wheel goes up and down as well, so electrically. There we go, that's coming up. So if I push one of the memory buttons, then see the memory button's taking it back down to where I normally have it. So that's quite handy. If I push the other memory button, everything's changing. The seat's going down and everything. That's for my wife. It's a bit smaller. And then when I put mine on, I'm going backwards, and the back adjusts as well. So that's quite handy. This one's also got the fully automatic air control, aircon, which was not common, certainly not in the UK. They were a lot of extra money. Most of them have got two. In fact, they've got the same system. The wiring loom in this car, I'm certain, is almost identical to the Crossfire, the Chrysler Crossfire, and the heating system, the aircon system that's in the Chrysler Crossfire with 2 different dials, and it's manual, and you turn these dials. That's what most Mercedes of this type had, and everything else, the position of the electric windows and the lights, which are over here, they're the same in the Crossfire, exactly the same. And obviously I'm sure they just used the same loom for that, because it was all that period. But this car had the optional extra, or the more expensive version, which was the automatic. So you just wheel in the temperature and it changes, so you can go from hot, obviously, and all the variations in between, back to cold. It's already changing as I've done it. You can turn the aircon off and have it as just blowing air from outside, and you can force the fan so the fan's on full all the time, or in that position there, the middle one, that's the fan on its highest position, automatic, and its lower position. So though you cannot adjust, the only thing you can do with the speed of the fan is to have it on low, or you put it on to that position, which gives you the maximum, but it drops down when the temperature is reached according to what the control is here. So it is automatic. It's got rear wiper wash and intermittent and everything on the rear wipers. Quite a lot of stuff going on there. There is a blank plate there, so obviously there must have been something that this car could have had, possibly. Maybe they didn't have it in the UK, who knows. But there is a blank button there, but the rest of them are... If you look at some of the other cars of this period, of this type, you'll see a lot of them haven't got as many buttons working as this, and they don't all have this automatic system. It's got one cigarette lighter or power switch now, power socket there. The ashtray, I don't think it's ever been used. And funny enough, it's full of these little smelly things that were in here. I think they used to smell, obviously, but they've been here for 25 years. They were in here when I bought the car, and I never had the heart to take them out. Somebody before me put them in, and I've left them. It looks a bit scruffy at the moment. It's full of junk, and it needs cleaning. But underneath the mats and underneath the dust, the car is in excellent condition, and it is almost mark-free. Anyway, something cool in here now. Right, so let's have a look at the last car that I've got here. Say it's a very hot day. Right, this is my Citroën 2CV. Now, I've had this car, not too sure now. I've had it about 10 years at least, I suppose. Yeah, probably 10 years. And so it's about 10 years since this paintwork was done. It's the same color as the Dodge, which is electric blue from BMW Minis. This car was stripped completely, and basically it's a new car, or it was when it was redone, because it had a new chassis, a galvanized chassis. The doors, the bonnet, the boot, I think actually most of the those items were new, so I only kept the actual basic shell. The hood was new, and all the interior, which I'll show you if you haven't seen that, that's new. The boot was fully carpeted, and I did that. There's a spare wheel underneath that box there, so you got a carpeted boot, which is unusual for a 2CV. Makes it a bit quieter, and it was completely carpeted inside. Underneath these carpets, obviously it's all lovely and blue, but they're so thick, and there's so many carpets there, because I've got the red carpet on top of the this fitted carpet, so to protect it, and of course it just makes the car that much quieter. Now, what we did was I bought, I forget how many, it was something like about 6 leather hides, and had the car upholstered in this leather. This is all leather, including the door panels. This is all leather, and it cost a lot of money to have it done, but everything in it was new. Even the that place at the back behind the seat, that was made especially for the car. So let's have a look in the front. So this is really, nothing's been done to it since I had it restored, apart from a few little things. I bought these stainless steel clips that hold the window down. Not a lot else you can do with a 2CV, really. Oh, and I had electric washers put on it, because when the 2CV obviously didn't have electric washers. It had some pump thing, you pushed it and it squirted water up, but I had this button, which is lovely, this little chrome button, absolutely lovely. It's almost flush, but it works I just turned the ignition on. It works the washers. There we are. And then you've got the wipers there. So the other thing is, of course, I have driven this car quite a lot, and it's been driven to Poland. We took it to Poland about 5 years ago to the World 2CV rally, and we drove all the way to Poland and back via Germany. I did have a problem, and there's a video on my channel about it. That was that I didn't know what the problem was at the time, but we were going on the motorway and the car seemed to, well, it overheated, and it was because the carburetor had vibrated loose and caused the problem. It didn't do any damage, and when it was finally sorted out, the car's been fine since then. And it's a lovely car to drive, no problem at all. And you know, I wouldn't sell it, I don't think. These are the cars that I'm kind of keeping. So there's a couple of other cars then that we should talk about, I suppose. And let's find somewhere and we'll talk about them. That was the rest of the cars that I had, because I haven't got them now, because that is all the cars that I have at the moment. Right, well, here we are. We're sitting here in part of our woods. Quiet little spot. Nice to come here, and peaceful at the moment until there's some development that's coming our way, but that's another story. But basically, this is a very quiet, private little area with no one around me. The other side of these, this grass and stuff here, just beyond where that tree is and running along, is a river. It's not a big river, but it goes through the middle of the town. It is a river. Normally it's quite low, not very high, and not running very fast at all, if running at all. And then occasionally, you know, when we have a lot of rain, certainly in the autumn or the winter maybe, it comes up much higher. It comes up nearly to the bank. If it does overspill, it'll go to the other side. The bank on the other side is actually lower, so it's a bit of a floodplain there. But about 18 months ago, there was something strange going on upstream, which I've now discovered. But anyway, the result was that the water almost came to an end here. They were taking water and stopping it for some reason. And then, all of a sudden, the water was released, and this river rose up in a few hours and actually overflowed into our land. And it went as far as the hard that I've just been talking about, where my Mercedes is parked. And that was under about a foot of water, or 18 inches of water. Now, a few weeks before this happened, the Aventine was out driving around, and suddenly there was a big bang, and the cone that takes the front suspension, the top of the front suspension, broke, and the front suspension on one side collapsed. And we managed to, well, actually it was my wife, she managed to drive it home with the wheel rubbing on the bodywork, a tire rubbing on the bodywork, and I discovered that I couldn't buy a new cone. Though, after a bit of investigation and some advice, I managed to find somebody who had one that was brand new. And the reason he had it was because he had the same problem, so he ended up getting some made in Switzerland, apparently, and he had one left. So I bought it off him. So the Aventine, when this flood of water rushed into our land, the Aventine was parked on that hard, really unable to be driven anywhere, with the new suspension cone sitting in the back waiting to be installed. So I got my waders on at this time, and I'm walking around the wood and looking at all this water, total amazement, and I noticed that water is come up to the bottom of the door of the Aventine. So I thought, well, I can't move the car. I'm probably going to damage it more. It's, you know, driving it, or trying to get it started and driving it. So I decided to just leave it. I thought, well, the worst way, I'll have a damp carpet, because the water had reached its highest point, and it was just underneath the door, it seemed. Anyway, long and short of that was that actually the water did go into the footwell of the car, and I didn't know, but the ECU was in that footwell in a compartment, and it flooded the ECU. So when I tried to start the car after the water went down, the car was totally dead. The ECU had been soaked in water, and I tried for a long time to find another one, but I couldn't, because they were unique to that model because of the fact it was right-hand drive, it was 6-speed manual, there weren't many brought in the country, they don't make them anymore, and so on and so on and so on. I was trying to go down the route of getting it repaired, because there are people that will repair these things, you know, meticulously go through and try and clean them. But in the end, with one thing and another and everything else going on in my life, I decided to sell the car off, basically, to the man I bought it off, who deals with the Aventines, on the basis that I get a bit of money for it, stop the car sitting there deteriorating more and not get fixed, and that he could probably make better use of it than I could. So that was the end of the Aventine, which I wasn't happy about, because I did love that car, and it was so unique, and I was pleased to have had it. But it was the decision that I made at the time, under a lot more pressure than I am now. So that was what happened to the Aventine. Then we've got a situation that I don't really want to talk about on YouTube videos, and that's the political aspects and cultural aspects of our country and the West and so on. But let's just suffice to say that I have a pretty fatalistic view of the future of the cars that I'm talking about in this video. Combustion engine cars, especially old ones and so on. And I think that the first thing that's going to happen is that we're going to find it difficult to get spare parts. I mean, it's getting difficult now, because I basically couldn't find any spare parts for the Aventine. Let's just take a little stroll while I'm talking, but I couldn't get any spare parts for that. And as we all know, spare parts are essential to cars now. Even the simplest thing that stops the car from, or if you just get a warning light coming up for a sensor and the car drives okay and it won't pass the MOT, the car can't be driven on the road anymore. So you have to keep the car in almost perfect working order, because the legislations involving these cars is so tight now that you can't do what, well, used to do when I was young, and that was have cars that basically, as long as you could get them to drive in some sort of fashion, you were okay. So I got a bit concerned about my Jag. I still had all these cars, and the Jag, my XJ8, which was immaculate, and it was now without a garage, and I had it MOT'd and I had it serviced, and it was in perfect condition. And I was thinking, well, how long is it going to stay like this? And another weak moment, I decided I'd sell it, because the pressure of looking after, the stress really of looking after all these cars and trying to keep them in good condition and try to finish this building project which I was involved in. But as it happened, I sold the car to a lovely guy who was so pleased to get it, and he has looked after it apparently, and he loves it, and he writes to me occasionally and tells me how, glad he is and how it's getting on, and it's perfect. So it's found a good home, and it was probably a better home than me, because it's being used and a lot of time doting on it, whereas I had other cars. So that left me with the cars that I've just shown you, and I kind of stopped here. I'm not going to get rid of any of these cars, and now that I finished the project, it's always possible that I may start wanting to get some more. But as I've just finished the project, I still haven't sorted out what I'm going to do now with my time. I am trying to get all my cars in full working order and try and get them out a bit. And that's really the story of the cars at the moment. And the reason that I haven't been posting videos is because I haven't been going out anywhere, and there hasn't been actually a lot of things to do. There are car shows now. They stopped obviously during COVID, but I kind of got out of the swing of it, and then I didn't have the real time to do it. But we'll see what happens. I'm going to go probably take the Dodge out this Saturday somewhere, and when I do, I'll probably take a few pictures, and I'm going to decide what to do with videos now, and whether I start producing more videos again. That's a lovely, look at that willow. That's a very old willow up there. That's on the bank of the river. And this spring I had to get some help because a number of large branches had fallen, and they were blocking the river, and I couldn't deal with it, so I had to get a guy in to help me, and we had them all cut up and pulled out of the river. But it's a lovely tree, except that it's can be dangerous if one of those big branches, which eventually get to the point they're so heavy they break. There's one there that was underneath that big one that goes across the river, and there's the river down there. Let's have a look. So you can see these are the branches that were cut up and dragged out of the river. I don't doubt if there's much water in that river at the moment. No, it's probably down to nothing. Yep, it's just a trickle. Look at that. So that's all there is. But you can see from the mud normally, because we haven't had any rain here now for in this area here for almost 2 months, and this river doesn't go far. It starts only a few miles away, so there isn't much water behind here, and it's down to nothing. But once it starts raining, this will come right up to the riverbank here. It'll come up to the bottom of this tree. And of course, these willows suck water. So this is this wood here that I have, which is a lovely wood, and I've talked about it before, but everything in this wood here we planted. When I bought this property, this was a field. It was a farming field. It was used for cows. Had sheep on it as well, I think. I don't think it's ever had crops on it. Well, from what I understand, hardly ever had crops on it. So it's only ever had grass with animals grazing. We planted these trees in the year 2000 and just let them grow. And we've got quite a wood now. There is a mixture of trees. There's some conifers, not a lot, but there's little groups of conifers like here. And they've grown amazingly. There's another little quiet area down here, which is nice to come down to. But unfortunately, there is a building development going on around us, because we're not far from the center of the town. You can walk to the town center from here in about 20 minutes or less. And there will be houses over there, and there'll be a road coming across this field and across there. And there'll be houses in the distance there. There'll be houses over there. This is the progress. And the reasons for it I'm not going to discuss. So the river comes round the edge. That's my land ends where the grass is, basically, and just before the trees is where the river is. And we were sitting over there behind that tall tree in the distance just before, and it comes around here, and the river's down in here, what there is of it at the moment. But it's very lovely here, very quiet. Anyway, I've got one more vehicle. Let's go back and have a look at that. Right, well, while we're just walking back to have a look at this last vehicle, I just mention my thoughts a little bit about the problems that car ownership is likely to have, is from my perspective. And everyone has a different point of view on this now. The politicians, who I don't have any respect for, have decided that they want to phase out, or are going to phase out, sorry, not want, they are going to phase out combustion engines. The practicality and the probability that this could actually happen, especially by 2030, I just think it's so ludicrous that I just don't believe that is going to happen. But so the people that argue that we'll still be able to use our cars, I wouldn't argue against that. The people that say that old historical vehicles and that will probably get a pass, and you'll probably be able to get the fuel for them and be able to use them. And I think that's probably true. The fact that there's a practical problem, and when it comes to it, we may have to continue. But what the issue is, that the car manufacturers are, I think, using the opportunity, and partly because they're being instructed to, they're not now supporting the older vehicles, because by not supporting older vehicles with spares, they're going to help what the government wants, and that is to phase all these cars off the road. So, the fact that you end up having to get a fairly decent car, let's say like my Jag or that Crossfire that I have, and you end up having to take it off the road because you can't get, some particular part which is dedicated to it. And I had that problem with my Volvo XC90, which basically in the end I had to sort of scrap because it was nothing. The car was fine, but there was a minor problem which nobody could solve. But you end up having to dump a reasonably good car, whereas in past times, you would have kept this car going. So I think a lot of cars are going to be forced off the road, and probably the majority of them during this period. Now, whether they end up, these people, buying electric or whatever, I just don't know. So there is a question mark, because I have my views, and the answer is, oh, look at that. The answer is, I don't know. And I have doubts that anyone else really knows. I listen to politicians, I listen to so-called people who claim to be experts, pundits on cars, other video people, and they all have slightly different opinions, and I don't believe that any of them know anyway, because we don't know what legislation will come into play in the next, decade. We don't know what problems are going to hit us around the world in the next decade. So I think the factor of uncertainty is so great that to be committed to cars financially is a difficult one. If you've got a very expensive car, let's say you've got something that's like £250,000 Ferrari or Aston Martin, I don't see that going down in value, particularly because it's like paintings, isn't it? People don't want these cars to drive anyway. It's just a commodity to keep money in, and a vessel, as it were, to keep your cash in, because you know that you'll be able to sell it at sort of, or even more than you paid for it. And you don't drive it. You also want it as a bit like the way I think I want to keep my Crossfire, in a small way. So people who've got a lot of money would do the same thing with their expensive Ferrari. Then you've got the cars that are not worth a lot of money, the normal everyday car that people drive around, and I think those cars will just be driven until they can't drive them anymore. They're taken off the road, and that's the end of it. It's the cars in between which tend to be liked and loved and kept until they become so old that they become classics, and then they're cherished and money spent. I think those cars are the cars that won't happen. Right, well, I forgot I've got another Citroën here somewhere. See if I can find it. Oh, there it is. I've had this car for about, oh God, at least 10 years. It's an old Diane, and the reason I bought it, it was in a barn. It had been left for years, and I arranged through somebody else for the farmer to sell it to me, and he did. And he said he'd get it out the barn, and I could have it. But unfortunately, he used a sort of a forklift or something, a teleporter, and when he got it out in the barn, he caused all this damage. So it was brought over here, and that's how I left it. So it's been sitting here for over 10 years. What I really wanted it for was for the engine, because the engine is the same, apparently, that's in my Ami, and this one seemed to be quite good. So I thought it was a good, source of spares, really. But what I did do, I took the steering wheel out of it. So the steering wheel that was in there was beautiful. It was blue, and it was old hard plastic or Bakelite or something, and it's what I put in my 2CV. So the steering wheel in my 2CV, which is blue now and matches the car, and it's an older design as well, much better than the one that came with the car, I used in my 2CV. So I just thought I'd keep it for the spares, really. So anyway, that's that. But then we've got my last thing that I've still got. Right. And here we've got my 1961 Vespa. This is it's a 1961, and it's Italian, and it's registered in the UK as an historical vehicle, which means it doesn't comply with anything that's modern, and it doesn't have an MOT, or it's basically as it was. I mean, it's been restored, so it's in lovely condition. It's basically a new scooter, really, but it doesn't have indicators or anything. So it's it just has the it only has to comply with the basic roadworthiness, but it doesn't have an MOT. Anyway, it runs beautiful, but at the moment, because of COVID, I took it off the road. It's not legal at the moment to be put on the road, because I haven't, well, to pay tax on it. I think it's 0 now anyway, so you don't have to pay anything, but I took it off the road anyway. It's not insured or anything, so but it's just lovely. It's a bit of a toy, really. Now, problem I found with it here, the number of potholes in the roads around where I am are terrible, and with the small wheels on here, I went over a couple of potholes and I wrecked one of the front tires, and they're quite expensive, the white wall ones. So anyway, it's a lovely thing, and I just hang on to it. What I'd really like with it is to have it sitting in the lounge, so I could sit on it in the house, but that didn't go down too well. Okay, so that's the scooter. Right, well, I better end this long and involved video. I'm sitting in my little hideaway place. This is the place where I keep loads of old junk. I've got under that cover there is a pool table, one of the ones that come from a pub or whatever. One you put money in, you play pool with the numbered balls, I've got an old snooker table as well that I've had for over 50 years. But here, this is sort of the graveyard of lots of old junk and leopard skins up there, which you can't really get rid of now. And I've had those leopard skins. Actually, I bought them in the 60s, in the early 60s. There's some deer heads up there as well. Stuff I've had over the years in various houses that I've owned. And a piano there. The piano, actually, upright piano. The first house I ever bought in the late 60s. The guy said to me, "Do you mind if I leave the piano here when I move out?" Because he said, I just can't get it out of the house. I said, "Oh, no, I don't care. That's fine." Well, I was really pleased because I had this upright piano. And I've lugged it around from house to house all my life. It's sitting there now. So, it's like my cars. Everything's just sitting around. I think we're going through some strange times, and I hope everything's going to work out. And I hope that everyone who is interested in cars is going to be able to pursue their hobby or their interest. But I think, as I said before, we've all got different opinions, and we will have to see what the future holds, because there is, in front of us, it seems, a lot of different roads, and we don't actually seem to be in charge of the vehicle that we're driving, and which road we're going to end up going down seems to be up to someone else. Bit of a conundrum, I think, at the moment, as to know what the hell is going to happen with our futures. So I'm kind of a bit of a pessimist on one hand and an optimist in the sense of being hopeful. So I'm going to end this, and anyone who's got as far as the end of this video has done really well, and I thank you very much. But I promise that my next video will not be philosophically distraught as this one is. I think it's the prospect of what could happen to all the cars and everything that I've got that's sent me down this road. Anyway, I'm going to end it there. I'll see you on the next video, and thank you very much for listening and watching this. Bye for now.